When it comes to a Black woman, she was supposed to be perfect. So failing to be perfect is a fatal flaw. What we need to give is the freedom to fail and succeed in a way that is human rather than stratospheric. At the end of the day, the activist job is not to run interference for a campaign. And a campaign's job is not to be the most popular person on Twitter. Let's talk about identity politics.
I want to ask because I also saw an article you wrote about Black women. I think a lot of these phenomenons we talk about, Black women are maybe the largest group victim of these. You spoke about like the dehumanizing rhetoric around them, even kind of in terms of when we try to bolster them up, we can deify them. And in the long run, that this can be harmful as well. And then, you're so quick to turn around on them. I think you used Fani Willis as the example. I think Kamala Harris makes a pretty good example as well.
Yes.
Could you just expand on that for us here a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I did. I wrote a piece, gosh, this was a while ago now, and I feel like it's been weirdly over and over again relevant again. But
Yeah.
yeah, when this I was talking about Fani Willis specifically in this situation because I think, look, I think what happens is it's a familiar cycle. We take a Black woman who has done something great and we hero worship her, we deify her. And right, what I say in the piece is deification is still a form of dehumanization, even if it's the prettiest form that it comes in. You anytime you're treating a human as not human, it is going to lead to something that feels a lot like objectification. And for Black women, that is really dangerous because what happens is you take someone like Fani Willis or like Stacey Abrams or like Kamala Harris and you say, oh my gosh, she's larger than life, she's going to save us. But then her losses feel more permanent and her mistakes feel more fatal. And she's not allowed to be human the way everyone is allowed to be human. Kamala Harris loses a big race and people, say, well, she should never run again, despite the fact that our political system is pretty well based on the idea that you run for office and you lose and you run again and you learn from the last one. We have
Joe
so many
Biden.
examples of Joe Biden famously, right? And that's the thing. We have so many examples of that. But when it comes to a Black woman, she was supposed to be perfect. So failing to be perfect is a fatal flaw. And that's the problem with that kind of thing. It's the same thing I've seen with Stacey Abrams. So many people saying, well, she needs to be done now because she's lost. Well, in addition to, again, our system being based on the idea you can lose before you win, and you often do, it's a little short-sighted to say that Stacey Abrams lost. Stacey Abrams transformed Georgia along with the incredible Black women who organized the state and really put it on the map as the battleground state it should have been seen for a while. But she was the architect of the victories that got us two Democratic senators from this perpetually red state, right? So it it feels like a pretty short-sighted thing to say, well, she lost, and therefore, when it was her strategy that won for all of us, right? So this is, I think, the danger, though, of that. We take someone and we blow her up and we say she's the savior of democracy. The other side of that is failing to move mountains is seen as, oh, well, then she failed, even if she's failing at something no one could have succeeded at. And so that, I think, is something that and it's related to this question of authenticity, right? Because again, there is this, it's sort of, what is she required to be in order to even be seen, to be sort of taken seriously? What she's required to showcase is so much more than we can ask for anyone. And so I think that's what we need to do when we really talk about trusting Black women, wanting to be grateful for the role that Black women have played in democracy. What we need to give is the freedom to fail and succeed in a way that is human rather than stratospheric.
And I think there's something to be said too about society creating these absurdly high standards for people of color and then
Yes.
tearing them down anytime that they fail to meet them. I
Yeah.
do before we get to like the disruption stuff, I want to ask about identity politics because we have conversations of like woke one. I don't know like how well you're tapped into that stuff, but like woke one and woke two, and is it going to come back? And did we go too far? And there's, some on the left will critique this with, everything should be looked through like a class lens. We went too hard. We lost working class voters. Those on the right, obviously, DEI, it's a handout to people of color. And I think in the middle of that, you have, well, the people of color feeling like politics still doesn't serve them the way that it should. So like I really wanted to ask you as a writer on race and authenticity, like how should people of color exist in a body of politics that they feel doesn't represent them?
Yeah. Let's talk about identity politics because this is one of my favorite conversations because we don't have a good definition of identity politics. First of all politics are identity politics, right? Like, my favorite thing is to listen to people rail against identity politics and then go, and that's how we lost white working class voters. That's identity politics. White working class voters is an identity. The decision to target them and to say that they can swing elections is a political decision that isn't based in fact. It's based in that's where we think we can get somewhere. So it is definitionally identity politics. So to some extent, all politics are identity politics, and it's a useful thing. It's sort of a useless thing to talk about if everything is that, right? What people mean clearly is we say identity politics when we're being pejorative and we're trying to say you're paying too much attention to people of color. You're paying too much attention to fill in the blank of person with marginalized identity.
Yeah.
But we're comfortable with identity politics when we are doing it from the lens of the sort of dominant group. When we're talking about white people, when we're talking about straight people, when we're talking about men, we have no problem doing that kind of identity politics. So when we disparage it, what we're really doing is making a political calculation that marginalized communities are not where we should be putting our political attention. People are free to make that argument, but they should make that argument full-throatedly and admit that that's what they're saying. Stop complaining about identity politics and say, I don't think it makes sense to focus on that group. And then let's let the chips fall where they may, but at some point you might be looking around and going, chips are falling, because that doesn't actually serve anybody very well. When we talk, I mean, yeah, the woke one is crazy. It was a pretty hilarious line. But look, first of all, that wasn't woke one. Woke one was what I remember. Like, I remember asking my parents, like, what does that mean? Like, because they were like of the generation where you would say, like, as a way of saying bye to other Black people, you'd say, stay woke. Like that was like it was a thing. It was like, it was a like it was stay up, stay woke. It was, we see it. It was a way of in group greeting and, sort of signaling, yeah, we know what's going on. Like, yeah. I feel like that was woke one. This had to be like woke one point something at least. But look, I think that we're going to have a moment where a lot of Democrats who maybe said some things that they don't fully stand behind because there was a moment where they felt like in order to keep up, I need to be saying or doing these things. And if that's what people were doing, which I'm starting to suspect there were a lot of people who were, they should distance themselves from those things. I don't think any movement has benefited from people sort of performatively co-opting language to then say it really means something else, right? I think there are going to be a group of people who are saying that's not really ever what I meant and they should step back. I think there are many more people who say, look, what they're really trying to say is there was a period of time where we were talking about these issues and we were using a lot of shorthands because there was kind of an understanding that we all knew what we were talking about, but we didn't. And we're going to take a step back and bring more people along with us. I don't think that's distancing yourself from woke one. I think that is doing what we should have done in the first instance, which is having a more like community conversation and educating people and bringing them along. The only sort of failure I see of the kind of 2020 racial justice reckoning moment is that we kind of abdicated the need for community organizing.
Yeah.
What started happening was activists were speaking directly to leaders And what we noticed was that we very often had a shared language, so we could shorthand a lot of things. A lot of people didn't have that same language.
Mm.
And historically, what used to happen is activists spoke directly to the community.
Yep.
They brought people together, they organized, and they brought people along. And then they went to leaders, to elected officials, and said, look how many of your voters are with us. They're showing up for protests. They're demanding that you do X, Y, and Z. You can take this position and still have it be politically popular. So do it. We skipped that step. So I feel like what happened was a lot of people who maybe had a shared understanding, and a lot of times that understanding was based on kind of an academized like set of vocabulary, and we were all speaking one language and going one direction, and no one was moving voters. And then all of a sudden, people looked around and said, oh, wow, voters aren't there. And so then a lot of those leaders said, well, I was never really there either. I was just kind of doing it because I was told to. So we're getting backlash, but I don't think that backlash is inevitable because of the positions we took. I think that backlash happened because we didn't follow the process.
Yeah.
So I want the same people who were saying all the things in woke one about defund the police and abolish ICE. I mean, which I don't think is, I think that has actually become one that people are sticking with. But all of the other things that people think were so unpopular, to do just a little bit more of the work to bring more people along. I don't think anybody was wrong. I don't think anybody was sort of like saying something ridiculous. I think that we had an activist strategy that never got converted to a community organizing strategy. And I think we just have to go back and fix that.
Yeah, that's actually oddly on par to what I always say on my channel is like my read on what happened is there's, you know, the social politics kind of on the ground, and then there's electoral politics, and the difference is like the nuances that you have to take up, like electorally there's regional nuances, there's like even like how much people are making, just geographic nuances, these kinds of things, where on the ground it's more just moral, right? Like you push for what is morally good, and there is like when these things clash, there needs to be kind of a working of whether it's the framing, how you sell it, the focus, what it be, where I
Right.
think
Yeah.
that's kind of what we abdicated in 2020. Just to stay there for a second, how is it that you think we do that fix then? Is it like I think defund the police is the big one, right? Where like I think there's a lot of moral good behind what people were pushing for, but the slogan pretty clearly was like adopt it to be used against us pretty effectively. So like how do you fix these things? Is it just fixing the slogan? Is it sticking more to the principle? Like what is, and I know this is the $1 million question, but what do you think is sort of the workaround here?
I think defund the police, I want us to reframe this. I think defund the police is maybe one of the most effective like activist and organizing strategies we've seen in recent history.
Mhm.
Because if you ask people, like elected officials, do you support defund the police? They will almost across the board say no. Now, I don't believe that police officers who are just doing routine traffic stops should be holding guns. I think there should be an alternative to 911 for a mental health emergency. I think a lot of the money that goes toward training police officers on like equipment they don't need to police community could be going to community interventions. I don't think that we should be able to, use Department of Defense equipment to patrol the streets. And they will say all of that and not appreciate that every single one of those things sounded like the most far flung, so extreme. No one would have gotten on board with that before defund the police. The whole conceit of an activist strategy is you take something that is farther afield and you try to pull people toward it. You try to open what's called the Overton window, right? You
Yep.
open like what people consider reasonable and take it further than they would at that moment because you're not arguing for tomorrow, you're arguing for 20 years from now. If you read the like academic underpinnings of defund the police or any abolitionist movement, like prison abolition, nobody is saying, so next week we should tear all the prisons down and that's that. And then like, I don't know what happens next Tuesday. Like no one is arguing for that. What people are talking about is like remaking a system so that the idea of the privatized police, the police system that we have and the privatized prison system that we have would no longer be necessary, that all of that money could come away, and that the impact would be that we massively defund these institutions. But nobody is talking about just don't fund the existing police system and keep everything exactly how it is. So when the slogan started, it wasn't, and I feel like there's just a little bit of condescension that happens. That's like, oh, these people just think we don't need police. That wasn't ever the argument.
Yeah.
But what it did was get people on board with all of these policy solutions that we never could have gotten people to seriously think about. Because it's not like people weren't asking. It's not like out of nowhere, all of these politicians started saying, okay, yeah, I can get on board. Those had been asked for years and years and years. So the first thing I think we have to do is redefine, like actually stop taking an L on defund the police. It was incredibly effective. It was like forward looking. People were being patient. They were playing the long game, and we're seeing the impact of that. Now, the idea that, yes, people on the left are going to get painted with defund the police. And if you don't like that, it's an easy way to shut down any conversation with anyone center left to leftist, right?
Yeah.
I think that is the part that is like, look, politics, like I've talked about this before, but I really think that we have to get better about, there used to be separate strategies, right? You would have academics who would be writing papers and law review articles, like actually laying out, here's why this thing that you think might not be legal is actually legal. And then you would have activists who took things and did exactly what they did, packaged it in a way, try to open the Overton window, take an extreme position, and demand that people meet them. Now, those activists were also talking, though, to regular people. They were in communities moving voters. And then you had politicians who needed to get elected. And the whole point was they were going to take a position that matched their values and go as far as they possibly could and still be able to be elected. So all of all of those strategies were linked, very, very closely linked, but they were not identical. They were not the same strategy. Politicians need to get elected. And if politicians are hearing, I can't get on board with defund the police, then they should take the invitation to separate themselves out from a movement.
Yeah.
But they should also take the invitation to accept the policy prescriptions that they actually like and that match their values. At the end of the day, the activist job is not to run interference for a campaign. And a campaign's job is not to be the most popular person on Twitter with an activist community. Everyone has their roles to play. And I think some of us have to get more comfortable with the fact that those are separate. So I think that politicians can and should separate themselves from movements that are not politically popular. And in fact, that is part of the strategy. If the activists are saying defund the police, and you have a very progressive candidate who's like, I'm not talking about defund the police. I'm talking about this, and this. Everybody wins.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that is how we need to move from this moment and like reclaim everybody's role in this larger political ecosystem, get the people that we can get elected to go as far as we possibly can. And remember that they don't have to be activists, but at the same time, the politicians need to remember that the activists are not their political strategists.